Our panel on freedom to deliver, talking about different delivery styles. We are missing a chair and a respondent because our chair and a panelist, actually. Our chair and our respondent are husband and wife, and they are expecting a baby any moment now. Yay. So it's wonderful. Right, freedom to deliver! I know, how exciting. They are adopting a baby, and a birth mother chose them. And of course, you can't pick the timing when that happens. And the birth mother, they are in New Orleans, actually, waiting for mommy to give birth. She was due on the 13th. So they're waiting any day now. So they're not here. So I will be serving as both, but we'll probably just do the respondent time as questions if you have them. So I'm going to introduce the panel that we have here, and I'm going to read what they have here because, it's great. Natanya Blackman-Listach, recently Dr. Listach, is from Middle Tennessee State University. She teaches in their comm studies, right? Yeah. In their comm studies department, but she recently got her PhD from the University of Memphis. And she will be speaking about her work with largely African-American population students. Next, we have Anna, which one? Sherbak-Scobie? Sure. Go with one? Right. And she is just finished her MA at Arizona State University, and she is going to be speaking about her working with students from the Ukraine and and working with the basic course there. And my name is Shante Carballo. I am an assistant professor at CSU Dominguez Hills in California, and I'll be talking about our basic course and what we did to redesign that. I will start because I'm here and everybody asked me to go first. So let me get my timer so I don't go too far, so I don't go over time, even though we have a little extra because we have some people missing. All right, so what I'm going to talk about is our basic course on our campus is public speaking. We call it Fundamentals of Speech, and our department is theater, speech, and dance. So it's a really fun department to be in. I was hired because I have a crossover of theater and speech, even though I've primarily been dealing with the basic course, but I have an MFA in acting. So they wanted somebody like that. I'm also a dancer, so it fits perfectly. So I love my department. I love our university. It's fantastic. In fall of 2002, we got a grant to redesign our curriculum. So we were asked specifically to focus on what the course experience would be like for students, specifically at our university. So looking at public speaking, and not just what public speaking looks like overall, because, well, our school had not really focused on that before. They brought me in to do that because they were theater people teaching speech classes, not comm people teaching speech classes. And even though I'm technically a theater person, I've had so much history in comm. I started doing forensics in high school and then did it in college. And then to teach, I ended up in comm departments the whole time. So I have a much stronger comm focus. So they wanted us to really focus on that. And that was what weighed heavily on our course redesign. What was really important were our student demographics. We have 62% Latinx or Latina students, 21% African American, and 9% AAPI. That has shifted in the past years. It used to be, probably about 10 years ago, it was primarily African American, but the demographics of our neighborhood have shifted. We are about 20 minutes south of Los Angeles and 20 minutes north of Long Beach. So we're kind of sitting in this really interesting place. We are right down the street from Compton, which makes a difference. And South Central LA is we are the last stop on the bus line from South Central LA. So we have a really interesting dynamic and group of students. Only 3% of our students are white, but 5% identify as other. This was really important for us to focus on in our curriculum. So we had these threshold concepts that we looked at. Like, what are we looking for? And this was built with our current faculty and lecturers. The majority of our instructors for this course are lecturers. In California, at the CSU system, we do not call them adjuncts. They are lecturers. Most of our adjuncts are what we would call full-time equivalent lecturers. So they are teaching usually between 4 and 5 courses a semester. They get benefits and things like that. So most of our lecturers most of these classes are taught by lecturers. There are only 2 tenure faculty members teaching this course. And we have 26 sections in the fall and about 20 sections in the spring and about 12 people who teach this class overall. So we got together and said, what are these sort of problems that we're having, these threshold concepts we're looking at? And the first one was our students are having difficulty developing speeches for people to hear and not for people to read. All their speeches sound like they're reading papers because they're pretty much getting up and reading papers. So we wanted them to learn about how, like, this is a speaking exercise, not a writing exercise. This is a weird formatting thing. They had difficulty with the different delivery techniques. We were trying to teach them that you have to do it this way. You need to speak this way. You need to deliver this way. We also had a bunch of different formats of speeches, as most of us do in public speaking. You do the 5 speeches, so we have informative, you have persuasive, and you have impromptu, you have all these, and then an instructor choice one that gets picked. So it was too much for them, right? We realized that public speaking was rooted in these heteronormative teaching techniques that didn't really meet our students' cultural needs. We have a lot of first-generation students, a lot of students who are undocumented or children of undocumented families, and so that was really hard for them to grasp this. There's a model of how we deliver speeches. You need to match this model, and they were going, huh? That doesn't work like me. That doesn't work for me because 1, English isn't my first language, and 2, nobody in my neighborhood sounds like this. Why are you trying to make me sound like something that doesn't work, right? So we didn't. They also had no idea when to use academic versus colloquial language. We were getting, which I'm sure we all have that issue, we get these speeches that are very informal and they didn't know what to do. And this last one that somehow got caught off with the formatting in the switching over of the laptops. Many of us, as well as our students, were taught to copy. So we were just taught to mimic what we were taught. So this is how I do it, you have to copy me. Rather than actually learning and fully understanding how to do the idea, the concept, to actually deliver a speech. So they were just copying us, and we didn't really like that idea. So what did we learn? We learned through all of our research, and we took an entire year to do this. They gave us a whole year to do the process. I was given release time, and my lecturers were given about $3,000 to do this work. So we started over a summer and went through fall and spring semester. I demoed it in like a couple of semesters before they did, and then rolled it out to the entire department. But we decided we wanted to involve our students in the learning process. We realized that students should be telling us something. It should be a conversation. So we wanted to listen about what they needed from our class. We used a lot of information from the pedagogy of the oppressed, and that was something that really taught us to listen, that learning is a two-way street, and that we should be getting more from our students than we are giving them. So why are we not listening to what they're telling us? So in listening to what our students were telling us, by the way, this also comes post-COVID, so this makes a whole lot of difference. And our university was one of the last in our area to return to in-person court classes. So we stayed online and virtual for a while. So we realized we just had too many components in the curriculum. It was just overpacked. There's too much information to allow the students time to really master anything. We were getting this idea that we'd ask students after the class, like, what did you learn? Can you give a speech? And they go, well, we had these outlines and had this stuff. And that kind of mirrored what I would get. I think many of us get that when you travel and you talk to people, and I tell them, like, oh, what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm a professor. And they say, what do you teach? And I go, oh, speech. And they go, oh, yeah, I took a public speaking class once. I don't remember anything. And we get that from our students, too. And we didn't really want that, right? We really wanted to embrace the diversity of our students and make that a part of the curriculum. So we wanted that to be centered in what we taught them. We also learned that, come on in, you're good. We also learned that it's not the quality of speeches that makes the difference, it's the quantity. And that research actually came from Dr. Gary Reibold, who did this whole study. He spent some years studying that. And it says it's about the quantity, not quality. So it didn't matter if they gave 5 good speeches in front of a whole audience. It mattered how many speeches they gave. And I like the analogy I like to use is that it's like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym once or 5 times for most of us, and be, you know, super well built, right? You're like, yes, I went to the gym 5 times. Look at my muscles. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to consistently go to the gym over and over and over again. And over time, you remember that. You start to learn, your muscles remember. And that's what we were figuring out, right? That students were just not having enough of that repetition of doing it because they only had 5 times in front of the whole class. It didn't work, right? We also learned that the type of speech that students learned to give didn't really matter as much as how many speeches they gave. So it didn't matter that we taught them informative, persuasive, impromptu, and then instructor's choice, which was usually some mishmash of things. Some people would do interp, some people would do, you know, a personal narrative or something. It didn't really matter that they learned all those different types of speeches because what happened at the end is they didn't remember any of them. So what we wanted them to do was to know how to give one type of speech that was really good that they could actually cross-apply to all of the other ones. Dr. Reibold says it should be persuasive speaking. We went with that. He realized that extemporaneous delivery teaches students to think critically and develop their own delivery style. So before, we were doing some sort of kind of memorization, note cards, kind of extemporaneous thing, which we all do. You give them 5 note cards and they're kind of memorized and they're supposed to look at you, but really they're reading. It was all wonky. And then they're still trying to copy the way that you told them they have to deliver the speeches. But we discovered that if we used extemporaneous delivery, per Dr. Reibold's philosophy, that they actually get to develop their own delivery style. And they're not copying us. They're not trying to mimic something. It's what they would normally sound like because it's extemporaneous. And they're figuring it out in the moment, so they sound like them. Huzzah, right? Well, and then these speeches that they give in extemporaneous delivery is based on the Toolman model. So claim, data, warrant. And the way that Dr. Reibold uses it, he calls it a C. So it's statement, example, elaborate. So it works, and that C format works very easily for students. So we took that. Great. They do extemporaneous delivery based on the Toolman model. They do it over and over and over again. It'll work, right? And that's what we came up with. So then what we wanted students to know. We're like, okay, here's what we learned. Here's what we want them to know. We want them to know how to create and deliver a basic speech. And we wanted that speech to cross-apply to all different curriculums, right? So yes, you can give a speech in your speech class, but can you make that speech fit the speech you would give in your psychology class in a group presentation? Yes, that's what we were looking for. We also wanted them to know how to deliver a speech extemporaneously. Really hard concept, we thought, but we're gonna try it. Because we didn't want them to write a full speech ahead of time and then try memorizing it and delivering it, because we've all seen that happen, and with the amount of time that they have in a course, it does not work. We see them fail over and over and over again with that. We didn't like it, so we wanted to try something different. We also wanted them to know how to do research for their speeches and discuss that research in their own words. They forget the in their own words part. They don't know that part really well. So we wanted them to get really good at that. And with extemporaneous delivery in this model, this statement, example, elaborate, they get really good at the elaboration part because they have to, right? We also wanted them to know how how to develop their own speaking voice and delivery style. We took this from the idea that if you actually become a professional public speaker, you're more likely to speak in front of a group of your peers and people who are like you. So why am I trying to sound like a white, cisgender, heterosexual male? That's not who I'm gonna be speaking to. And I will tell you that as a professional speaker myself, I don't try to model that because most of the people I talk to are like me. So why are we teaching our students to sound like someone they're never going to sound like? The majority of people they're going to speak in front of are going to be their peers. And then we wanted them to know how to provide a critical analysis of peer speeches. Just because, sadly, on our campus, our basic course has 40 students in it. I've been fighting to get that reduced. It's really hard. So if we were going to do this and increase the number of speeches because we learned it's quantity over quality, how the heck are we gonna do that? It's gonna have to be done in a small group format, which is how Dr. Reibold proposed it. So in that, they need to be good critical analyzers of peer speeches and know how to do assessment. And honestly, it's the one who does the assessment who does the learning anyway, so it's actually a good teaching methodology to have. So here's what we did in our course redesign. The new course was built around delivery of speeches in small groups with peer feedback every single time. They are not graded on how well the delivery is. They are graded on the fact that they did the delivery. But the peer feedback is assessed and graded. So they give 2 forms of peer feedback. They give it verbally. In our school, the groups are between 8 and 10 students because of the size of our class and the structure of what we have. And so these small groups, they give them, and then they actually have to give feedback for every single person in the group. And they have to submit their feedback so we know that they are doing well with the feedback. The feedback is assessed, not the delivery. Just by doing it, they're going to get credit. And we actually found that just giving them the chance to do it, they actually learned it. It doesn't matter how good, it was just doing it, right? This methodology also allowed for a high margin of error. And it allowed for students to make a lot of mistakes on the road to mastery. We know the first time we do something, it's not perfect. But we only give them one time to do it in the standard public speaking model. So that wasn't gonna work for us. If we wanted to give them the opportunity to master something, we had to give them the chance to fail at it. We have to give them the chance to fail their way into actually learning. because we all know that you learn a lot of times by doing it wrong. So we reward them for just doing it. Just come and do it. I don't care if it's good, I don't care if it's right. You're gonna learn from my feedback, but you're also gonna learn from your peers, because you're gonna watch 8 other people in that group give a similar speech, and there you go. Oh, they did that, I should do that too. So high margin of error, it's okay. It also decreased the type of speech from 4, so they do 4 or 5 standard speeches, to 1 speech. So we only teach them persuasive speaking. They don't do informative speaking, they don't do anything else. But I think if we all know that, you need to be informative to be persuasive, and the format we use is problem, cause, solution. Super simple, super basic, that can cross-apply. If you can do problem, cause, solution, we teach them that 3 basic main points. There, in each of those main points is that C model. So main point number 1, statement, example, elaborate. Main point number 2, statement, example, elaborate. Main point number 3, statement, example, elaborate. In persuasive speaking, it's problem, cause, solution. They're taught that in every other speech, you just swap it out for topical main points. It cross-applies no matter what you're doing. But if you can persuade, you understand the psychology of persuasion, you can do it. That's the speech we chose. It also increased the number of speeches they get to deliver in the class from 4 to approximately 30, which was huge, right? And in our class, that's a big difference. And why it's approximately 30 is it's based on the number of students in the class. So if you have a class with 40 students in it, it's 30. If you have a class that has maybe 30 or 28 or a little less than 40, then they get a little more than 30 speeches in the semester because they have more time to actually deliver, and you don't have to do that. Some people are making faces like, how do we do that? In the structure of the class, in the first 8 weeks of the course, it is 1 day is speeches. And the speeches are that C structure, statement, example, elaborate, on a chapter in the textbook. So they have to read the textbook, do the C, come to class, and deliver it in groups. That's their speeches for the first 8 weeks. The days alternate. So my classes are on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Tuesdays are speech days on purpose. That way they have to read the textbook and do the assignment before I lecture. So they don't get to cheat and take my lecture and make it a part of their speech. So Tuesday is speech day, Thursday is lecture day. After the 8 weeks, they take the midterm. After the midterm, there are no lecture days. It's come to class and give speeches every single day. So that's how we get that 30 number of speeches, because they're giving them multiple times throughout the semester. And every day, they basically come to class. The other thing it does is it increases instructor feedback. It increases peer feedback, it increases peer engagement, it increases critical thinking. It gave us all these things that we didn't have time to give them a chance to do because we were so busy trying to lecture and teach the whole textbook and do the 4 speeches with 40 students. It just wasn't working. Now we have the time to do that. And we chose specifically what we wanted to teach in the textbook because we're not lecturing all semester. So we picked 5 or 6 chapters that we wanted to focus on. It actually ended up being 7, I think, because one of the textbook we currently use is OER, and it split introductions and conclusions into 2 separate chapters when most textbooks put them together. So it ended up being about 6 or 7 chapters. So it gave us all these wonderful outcomes that we were not expecting, because now we have time instead of having to push to spend, half of our semester on speech delivery. Now the whole semester is speech delivery, pretty much. So when we tested this out in spring of 2022 compared to fall of 2021, in fall, we had 60% of the students who failed in our asynchronous online class, and 21 in our fall 21 class, and only 12% of students failed in the spring 22 asynchronous class. For us, that's a big win. We still have a lot of people, obviously, we call them FDWs, and that's a pretty low number for an online asynchronous speech class for us. Those percentages went down quite a bit, which was great because it kept them engaged throughout the entire semester. And I'll be happy to share later on how we do our online class. Just so you know, we use a Flipgrid called Flip, and they record on Flip and give each other peer feedback. So they still have to do the same number of speeches. It ends up being more for them because they have to record the feedback, but that's how we do that. So it still models the same. In our face-to-face classes for spring of 2022, we only had 30% of students with FDWs versus 60% in fall of 21. Now, granted, I will say that these numbers are probably a little off. We're looking at them now. We've gotten funding to do reassessment now that we're a couple years in, and it's post-COVID. These are crazy code numbers. But we also discovered that students were actually able to connect with each other more. providing valuable feedback for success. So they are connecting with each other, they're interacting with each other, they learn, we give them this format for speaking, so their feedback has to say, I liked it when you did this, and I would like it more if you did this. So they get really good at telling each other what they think they can improve upon, and nobody hates each other, and that's the goal. We all say, this is what I would like it more if you didn't move so much when you were speaking. Great, yes, fabulous. The other thing we discovered is that students were really just able to develop their own delivery style, which is really lovely. They had their own voice. They weren't saying what we told them to say. They were coming up with ideas and thoughts about current events that were not what we were telling them to do. They were not copying the way that we deliver or we told them to do it. They were really discovering their own way. And then we were able to polish along the way and say, okay, here's how you want to change that, adjust this, and we're polishing rather than making them copy us, which was really lovely to see them do these beautiful things. Also, we found the students were thinking critically and developing their own thoughts and their own worldviews, which is really important for our students because a lot of things were concerning them and they weren't learning about them. Not in our classes, not in the other classes. We heard that they were not knowing about what's happening in the world. Well, we give them current event topics and they are now figuring out what's going on in the world and paying attention. It's lovely. We also, because of the number of speeches along with the peer and instructor feedback, it really allowed the students to grow because now they're constantly doing this. Not only did their level of ability for speech delivery increase, it also allowed them to grow in their confidence, it allowed them to grow in knowledge, and allowed them to feel, like they have ownership of their education, which is really fantastic. So how did we do it? So our standard assignments previously was 4 speeches, 1 instructor choice, so it was impromptu, informative, and persuasive speech. Now it's only persuasive speech, right? Only persuasive speech. Students were taught to write and deliver each component of the speech. So that was a really important part. We broke the speech down. So we did it as the first time they deliver, they build a speech after we do those C things, is they build it puzzle piece by puzzle piece. We found that just forcing them to give an entire speech, like here's the outline, go, give a whole informative speech, they went. So we broke it down and it's taught puzzle piece by puzzle piece. So the first speech they give is just how to do verbal source citations. Somebody knows how to do that. That's really awkward, right? It's so awkward to do that. You're like, how do we do this? So they literally just give a speech that's all verbal source citations, one after the other for their whole speech, more than they need in their typical speech. They do that one first. Then they do the introduction and the conclusion. And then they do their main points with those source citations in them. And then they put all the puzzle pieces together and deliver it as a whole speech. Then they get time to do that. So they deliver them as practice speeches in class. We don't tell them they're practice because then they won't practice at home, but we tell them they're group delivery speeches in class, and they do. They come in every day and have a different part put together. And it allows not only their peers to give them feedback, but it also gives me a chance to look at the information. They have to use they use one note card, we call it a magic note card. So they get one 3x5 note card folded in half, and each quadrant has something on it. They submit that, our LMS is Canvas, so they have to submit the card to Canvas, and so I'm actually able to see what they did in the speech, but I also check the cards in person. When they sign in, let me see your note card. So we get to see that they actually did it. It allows me to correct what's on the card and to make sure that they're ready to present the speech for that day. So it gives a lot of checks and balances, and when I'm checking those components of their speech, this introduction, I can see it and go, let's make these tweaks and so they're getting that personal interaction with me and they're doing it in groups. And I actually get to walk around and engage with all the groups. And I've gotten really good at, even though I'm with this group, hearing what's going on in that group. And so they will go, how did you hear what I'm doing? I'm like, I heard you, it was back there. I didn't have ears back there. I've just been doing it for a while, I'm good. So they get to deliver it as practice speeches and they learn. And that puzzle piece thing was really, really smart because it just took back from us feeling like they have to learn so much. No, we just need them to learn how to give a speech. So you should know how to build it. We built it. Their topics. Topics are always a problem. We don't know what to do. So we start by just giving them current events. For each one, they get 5 current events, and they're all things that are about what our student demographics should know. So things like immigration, student free tuition for college students. We're looking at things like Black Lives Matter, all things that should matter to these students that they should know about. And so these topics are relevant to them. We do give them the option. The last speech is their choice. They get to pick that topic. So it still gives them the opportunity to have ownership of that. And once they've mastered the first speech topic by its individual components, of course they put it all together, they're graded on the full speech. We allow them to sign up for those. So there are a few weeks of graded speech deliveries with the instructor. And they get to choose when they're ready between themselves and their group members. The groups do change every week in my class, and some of the other instructors, they don't change. They keep the same groups all semester. Just depends on the group. So they get to choose that, and I basically just create a group of people who are being graded. So it's still the group format. So and the other groups are still giving their speeches because they have speeches. So they're still working, doing the same thing. This group is giving their speech. I'm just there with an evaluation sheet on my iPad grading. They end up delivering 2 additional full persuasive speeches from the topics for the remainder of the class. So it's coming to. All right, so they wrote speeches. So we're going back to those threshold concepts, figuring out. So first, we were concerned with them writing for speeches for people to hear and not for people to read. We wanted them to know that this is a speaking exercise, not a writing exercise. The extemporaneous delivery component really changed that. It gave us that chance because if you're giving new speeches all the time, you're coming in, it's extemporaneous, you only get 1 card. Yeah, you can't write that whole thing out and memorize it. They tried. There's always somebody who tries to write really tiny, and then they look like this and go, I can't do it. And I'm like, if you just trusted yourself, you could do this. We really did find that they can do extemporaneous delivery, and they do it very well. And by the end of the semester, if somebody missed a speech, I give them that day on the final to make up a speech or something they may have missed. And I go, do you have your card for C number 4? And they're like, yes. They pull it out and they're like, I'm ready, let's go. It's amazing. And the same thing happens in the online class. You watch them grow. This idea that people were taught to copy, not to be original thinkers, us as well as our students. We realized, public speaking is rooted in this heteronormative teaching techniques that didn't include our students' cultural needs. Now we are addressing that. We're giving them the chance to speak for themselves, to talk about the things that they want, and to develop their own delivery style rather than having to copy what we're doing, which is really lovely to see a classroom full of people speaking in their own way, in all these different ways. It let them be themselves. And it's not like me. At all. It doesn't look like me or any of the other instructors. They get up and they are themselves speaking in their own voices with things that they're passionate about. It's really lovely to see them using their own voices. We found that they were having difficulty with using academic versus colloquial language. We actually discovered, if our students are going to be good public speakers, they should really learn to have a balance of both. Because if they're too academic, then that means that they lose all the people that are their peers. But they should know that there are certain things you probably shouldn't say in a speech, and finding that balance. We help them find that balance now, but we let them start with whatever the heck you say is okay. You're not going to lose points. You still get the A. Now let's polish it a little and make some adjustments. And we talk about perception and what it means if you do it this way versus this way. What does your audience think? And then they get to figure it out for themselves, what they want the audience to know about them. We realized they were having difficulty with different delivery techniques. This one just gave them the repetition of the same speech. Does it feel like it feels a little repetitive, but guess what? It's different topics. So it's new. So they're learning how to do the research. They're learning how to do all those things, but it's the same format. Problem, cause, solution. Each one, a statement, example, elaborate. They get it, and it's so repetitious that we know this. Now they know how to give a speech because it's the same one over and over again. That was what we discovered. It's been really fun to see this a couple years out. And what our students are doing, and we are loving it. We're going to do another round of assessment this year and see how it works. We wanted to see if our students are actually learning the things, like if they can assess it. We make them do reflection essays so they are able to do it. We see it, but we want to see it in data besides just our drop numbers. So thank you so much. There is a clicker here, friend.
Oh, I don't need it.
You don't need it? Do you want to plug in?
No, I'm good. This is just my speaking.
Oh, okay. So here, I will unplug this just for now, so you don't have to worry about that.
I'm gonna let your camera follow you and not me.
No, it's gonna be on you.
No, it should be on you.
It's just stick your face there. Look.
No, see, it doesn't even.
See, there you go. There you go. It's on you. We're recording it, and I have this device called a Pivo, and it actually will follow you when you're recording. So that's what she's working.
And now I'm watching my big head give my
Don't
presentation.
Look at it. Sorry. You got this.
So I'm looking at this in a little different way. I was looking at my own teaching style in regards to how that's helping or hindering my students. So I'm also going to time myself because I'm assuming I got about 15 minutes?
Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yep.
All right. My grandmother was my middle school principal, and she was my teacher when my mother and father were in grade school. Until the day she passed away, she entertained us with various stories from her teaching days. She talked about how she would get calls from parents at all hours of the night, how she would make sure her students had the basic necessities of food and clothing just so they could get to class. And people were always amazed when she truthfully told them that she remembered them. My grandmother was the quintessential Black female teacher. She and her colleagues worked hard to make sure that the next generation came up stronger and wiser than the previous generation. And in her days as a teacher, the community worked together to ensure the success of their children because the community took care of each other. Even in her days as a principal at a predominantly white school, the entire school seemed to mimic this caring environment that she cultivated in her pre-integration classroom. And once I left my grandmother's school, I realized that the safe haven of learning and that community that she had worked so hard to cultivate was not what everyone else experienced. Other schools didn't really strive to support the student as a whole. They simply taught so students could receive a score on a test. While there were individual teachers who carefully nurtured and guided their students, many simply taught because it was a job and it let them pay their bills. And my jarring transition from this community-based school to an individualistic and capitalistic experience, while it was years apart and while it was under drastically different circumstances, it really mirrored what Hooks talks about with her experiences with integration. And she notes that gone was the messianic zeal to transform our minds and beings that had characterized teachers and their pedagogical practices in our all-Black schools. Knowledge was suddenly about information only. So in my first year as an instructor, I noticed my own struggle with this battle between my desire to transform my students and their minds and the school's reminder that higher education is now a business. The school wanted to please its consumers, those students, by any means necessary, and now that customer was always right. And I experienced this struggle in so many different ways, from this wonderful textbook that we're required to use that barely looks at race and gender, to the increasing number of students who basically were like, "Can I speak to your manager?" whenever they didn't get the grade that they wanted. So my ideal educational standards were not matching up to the educational standards of current higher education. And in addition, I was always amazed at my colleagues' resistance to the cultivation of community for the benefit of our students. At my current university, and I'm glad nobody's in here from my current university, because I love my university, I do. But just like in academia as a whole, departments are battling for the funding to survive. And like I said, I know this happens everywhere. We're constantly at war with each other. That decreases our ability to work together to improve the educational quality for our students. The westernized concept of the student as consumer forces an instructor to teach to the student's satisfaction instead of teaching to the student's potential. And we cannot successfully educate the next generation if we're not allowed to push students outside of their comfort zones. So as an instructor, I aim to create a learning community that utilizes the best pedagogical experiences and approaches for my students. And I realize that my classroom utilizes 3 concepts or theories or pedagogical approaches, however you want to call them. I realized that without even knowing what I was doing, I was using the concepts of Afrocentricity, I was using womanism, and I was using that dreaded critical race theory to try to create a well-rounded and grounded student. So first with Afrocentricity, as Hooks says, Black children lost more than white students with the integration of schools. Black students lost their connection to the community and to teachers that went above and beyond the school's requirements to ensure each student lived up to their highest potential. Various scholars investigate this loss as it pertains to their specific fields, but because, I'm in rhetoric, I look at public address. I looked at Jack Daniels' analysis of irrelevant speech education as a useful parallel to my own teaching strategies. So to understand the impact of a speech education on Black students, Daniel said that this relevant education really is an education that centers around the unique experiences and needs of Black students, which can translate to any student, right? The overall goal of Daniel's relevant education is to create an experience that functions for Black people's psychological, political, and economic benefit, and he uses the speech education classroom to push students' understanding from their classrooms outside to their communities and beyond. This type of education is what creates students who not only understand that basic structure that we're looking for, like Shantae was talking about, of a speech, but also its effectiveness or its ineffectiveness in real life situations. And this is especially important to students who have to understand both the explicit and implicit rules that they have to adhere to in society. So while non-Black students, usually white students, get the opportunities to make mistakes and to learn from this trial and error, Black students are not held to that same standard. They got a higher standard that they got to live up to. We see that with police interactions. Anytime a Black person is mistreated by a police officer, usually white society says, hey, y'all Black people got to learn how to act right. That's why you're getting in trouble all the time, and I'm probably stepping on toes, so I'm sorry, everyone. But, if a white person is mistreated, then these critiques are replaced with the rallying cry to protect innocent people from those cruel police officers. And don't let the police officer be Black, because then we see a totally different situation. So Black students have to understand the dominant culture as well as their own culture, those connections between each. So a pedagogy that looks at Afrocentricity also has to look at the effects of the dominant culture on those who aren't a part of that culture. As Latson Billing explains, saying culturally relevant teaching uses student culture in order to maintain it and to transcend the negative effects of the dominant culture. So Afrocentric lens focus allows that instructor to look at all the parts of the culture and analyze their impact on the student. And in the speech classroom, because that's where I am, the use of Afrocentricity allows me to show all of my students the impact that race alone can have on an interaction. I can't hide the fact that I'm a Black woman. I walk in the room, that's the first thing they see. So since I'm a Black person, all of my experiences have a racial component to them. Asante in 2017 explained that Afrocentricity seeks to place the African in the center of events and situations that involve African people. And currently, the educational system in the United States overwhelmingly focuses on the white perspective, ignoring everybody else. Shifting this focus to an Afrocentric understanding really allows me to educate Black students as well as everyone else in the classroom on various aspects of that situation, and not just that understanding of a dominant culture that we tend to focus on. It also creates more mindful students who are cognizant of numerous standpoints in society. So as King and Swartz say, with the concept of locating people as normative subjects at the center of the socio-political, economic, and cultural phenomena of their time, this Afrocentric theory is a human-centric theory of representation with the potential to turn about the distortions that have been embedded in school knowledge related to African as well as other groups of people. So an Afrocentric future really benefits everything and everyone. Because I am short on time, I'm not going to really explain the tenets of womanism. So if anybody wants to know what womanism is at the end of this, I will gladly walk you through it. Well, yeah, I can answer when we get to questions. But we start out with womanism, which was created by Alice Walker. It was further expanded by Stacey Floyd Thomas, who created 4 tenets that went along with womanism, which were radical subjectivity, traditional communalism, redemptive self-love, and critical engagement. So when I'm looking at womanism is really important to my pedagogical approach because, as Royster notes, as participant observants within the community, African American women intellectuals are accountable to those with whom and about whom we speak. So while she's specifically talking about work and research, this can really look at my pedagogy as well. As a teacher, I should always remember my connection to the community I'm working with and the community that I live with. And as a Black person and as a woman, I'm uniquely equipped to observe and investigate the experiences of those whose experiences are similar to mine. So Peter and Johnson note that African American women educators are able to inspire African Americans to achieve excellence through education and use education as the foundation for helping African Americans to maximize their potential. However, I believe both the use of Afrocentrism and womanism in my own classroom really allows all students to achieve excellence. So using my own experiences helps students to learn through me, to analyze their own situations through different lenses other than their own. I have the ability to help my students discover these idiosyncrasies in the classroom that they can use to utilize their own newfound understandings. I have the ability to protect and to highlight my own Black community through my research and the instruction of my students. And I have the ability to plant seeds of doubts and stereotypes that have been ingrained in students' brains by people who never had the chance to explore those ideas outside of their own homogenous communities. So while some view a focus on race and gender as a restriction, I really view this focus as a tool to help my students understand themselves and their own places in society, which really leads to the potential of a greater understanding of everyone. So here we go on to critical race theory, because I know I love being in places where I can talk about critical race theory and not be scared I'm gonna get fired. So there's 6 tenets of critical race theory, which I am not going to go through. And I will definitely list out all of those if you would like me to, but I'm not going to do it right now. But the 6 tenets really allow me, once again, to analyze my own standing. They help me to understand my relationship with my students, my colleagues, and the administration at my school. So I know Shantae said I just graduated with my doctorate, but I've been teaching since 2006. Yeah. So I've been in this thing for a long time. While critical race theory has given me some tools to understand and navigate academia, to be an efficient educator, I have to look at the intersections. I have to look at how everything is connected. So Black women, as stated by Bacon, Black women's positions act as both obstacles and opportunities. And intersectionality really lets me look at all the things. I can look at race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, ability, age, and how they operate not as unitary, mutually exclusive entities, but as I hate that word. Thank you. Reciprocally, there we go, constructing phenomena that in turn shape complex social equalities. So it reminds me that isolating my Blackness, isolating my womanhood, isolating my ripe young age of 42, or any of the other things that are unique characteristics to me would create an incomplete understanding of my position in society. To understand my students and to understand myself, I have to understand how each aspect creates individuals. And I have to strive to understand how those pieces really interact with each other to form my standing in society. And a classroom that utilizes this concept of intersectionality really allows students to broaden their own horizons and to become conscious of a diversity of experiences beyond their own. So I want to tell you about something that happened to my oldest daughter. A few years ago when she was in 2nd grade, she actually got to give her first presentation. Yeah, and you know, that touched my speech teacher heart, right? Here I am, my baby's about to give her first presentation. It's during the COVID learning, so she's on the computer, and her teacher says, "What do you want to talk about?" And my baby says, "I want to talk about how African Americans started out as slaves in this country." I'm in a predominantly white community. We are a speck of a dot in my community, and we're in a very conservative community. And yet my sweet, shy child, who is the only Black child in her class, wanted her classmates to understand her history so that she could understand, or they could understand, her culture. She already understands that race, gender, all the things permeate everything, and she's surrounded by peers whose features don't mirror her own. But she understands that because the school is predominantly white, that she had to fight for what she knew. And she had to explain her situation to those who weren't quite like her. So to me, I was really kind of surprised when her teacher said, yeah, let's go. I would love to talk about this. And after her presentation was over, the teacher actually took the time to explain to second graders in a way they could understand what the slave trade was, how Black people got from Africa to America, and how that impacts us today. So this type of education isn't possible without an education that allows for the exploration of various ways of knowing, various ways of understanding, and various ways of being. And I was able to give my daughter the basic building blocks that allowed her to comprehend her own position and really explain its uniqueness to her classmates. She, in turn, just like in my classroom, has expanded her classmates' worldviews to a world outside of their own race. And ultimately, her little presentation on culture created an educational experience that really benefited everyone. So overall, my goal is to be an effective teacher and a scholar. I want to be a teacher that students actually trust and see as an asset to their educational endeavor. I want them to realize that success looks different for each person when it comes to academia. And I want them to understand that I'm here to help them succeed in any way possible. I'm sitting at a university that has mostly white students, once again, in a community that's really conservative. I don't look like everybody else. I'm the only Black woman in my department. And in many circumstances, I'm the only Black female teacher any of my students have ever seen, which makes it even harder. So the aim of a well-rounded education should be to create members of society that can not only think and act for themselves, but also work for the betterment of their own communities and a society as a whole. And by remembering my African roots, my womanist ideals, and the tenets of critical race theory, combined with intersectionality, I'm giving my students that chance to thrive. Thank you.
The magic
I know.
of technology and see if we can recreate this part one more time and see if the technology will be willing
Sorry, I'm reaching across so I don't...
to do this one more time. It did.
Yay.
And
Now we're just waiting on it to come on.
Shabam. While this is waiting to cooperate with us one more time.
It will come on, I promise.
Yes, it will. I'll start with a little bit of my background. I went to art school, so I have a creative mindset. So in my teaching, I combine art and science. So when I worked on my master's, I've discovered that a lot of my creativity is actually backed by science. Surprise, right? So as I start learning the theories in communication, I've started figuring out why I had this instincts to do things a certain way. It all started to come together, and I realized that, hey, there is a reason why I do a certain things the way I do. Now, there is a way to do this. Where do I click to make it to the fancy presentation mode? Ta-da! You see, technology is still not the thing. They did not cover that in the master part. All right, where's your clicker thing? Here we go. Where do I click? The top one. The top one. All right, so we're all here because this is not working, right? Because we cannot treat everybody. What does that thing do?
It's
Because
not showing
I-
up. It's
I-
not
I
showing
don't-
up on your...
I ignore this part, right?
Go ahead, keep talking.
Okay.
You're good.
So we're all here because, as we all know.
Oh, go back. When I touched the screen, it got to your...
There we go. We all know that the basic course, as we know it, we're all adapting, we're all changing to make sure that our students are getting the best out of it. Because as an educators, and the reason you're all here, because we want to make sure that by the end of our course, our students are retaining it, our students are growing, our students are learning, and not just that, because not all of them can climb the trees, unfortunately. If only they could, right? That would be just an amazing. So In public speaking, they say that there are three speeches: the speeches that we write, the speeches that we deliver, and the speeches that we wish we would have delivered. So this is the PowerPoint that I've prepared. This is the speech that I'm going to give, and then when I'm done with this, I'm going to go back to my room and I'm going to say, okay, I wish I would have done it differently. So what you see on the screen is going to be probably not what I'm going to say, but what I've discovered with my teaching, I'll point this way. It's not working.
Go the other.
Here we go. So what I've discovered with my challenges working with Ukrainian, some Russian, and other immigrant students, that there are few challenges, and most of them come down to the cultural gap. And that cultural gap comes to three main components, which is the mindset. Some of the students have the existing beliefs. I didn't know how else to label them, so they do have a certain mindset. There are topic challenges that are different from born Americans, is that the correct way to say it? And there's also a delivery techniques that are different from cultural nuances that may not be taken into consideration. So we're going to go into those three a little bit in the details and talk about this. So let's talk about the mindset. As we all know, with the DWACT educating us on the mindset, it all starts with the mindset, right? How we approach things. And the biggest thing is this: most of the immigrants comes from the background where if you are not ready, or if you're not perfect, you don't do it. In other words, in most of the immigrant cultures, if you're not perfect, you don't speak. If you're not perfect, you don't do. So most of the students don't volunteer or jump in to do an activity, or they don't volunteer to speak because they are not ready in their mind. So it prevents them from within to try to speak. So how do we overcome it? How do we change it? We go from it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to not know how to do things, and that's probably the hardest one when we go from perfection to the growth mindset. We're all making mistakes, and it's all started with me saying, hey, guess what? English is my second language. And I start making a joke saying that, hey, you wouldn't have guessed it, right? And everybody's like, we hear your accent, stop doing that. And then I keep saying, English is my second language, so I'm really not perfect and I don't do this. And my daughter keeps saying, Mother, you just got your master's in communication, you can't use that anymore. And I was like, but it works, right? I can still use it with people. And she's like, no, it doesn't. You communicate just fine. You can't do this anymore. So you have to keep doing that jokes with them that, hey, you don't have to be perfect. It's okay to not be perfect. You have to point it out, even though sometimes you think that they know it. It's something that needs to be pointed out. Criticism, they are their biggest critics. Inside of their heads, they keep telling themselves they can't do it. And as we all know, public speaking is scary to us. To them, it's probably 100, maybe even 1,000 times more scarier, because first, it's not their first language. Second, that critic inside that tells them, hey, you suck at it, and you don't know the words, you're using the wrong words, whatever it is. I know it, I've gone through it, so they are their biggest critic. So with them, you do need to use an extra praise more often. So instead of what I do in my classroom, instead of pointing out what they did wrong, I often even hold it back in the beginning of first few sessions, and I go for only pointing out what was done right, just to kind of build that encouragement. With the one, they come in with the mindset with, I am here and everybody's out to get me, in a sense, kind of thing. Like I have to compete against the rest of the class. So you have to build the community, going back to what the ladies already said. You building it as with peer-to-peer feedback. You building it with the group work. You building with, hey, we're doing it together. I started with, this is how you reach me. This is my contact information. This is how you can ask questions. That's how you reach out to them. So making sure that they understand that this is a community thing, because in most cases overseas, it is still the teacher kind of against the class. The teacher is out to make sure that you are going to work for your grade. They are not on your side. kind of a thing. So changing that mindset to, I'm on your side, I'm here to see you succeed, and I'm here to support you. That does go a long way. And going from fear to curiosity, that seemed to be the big thing. And how to do the whole change in the mindset is, don't make it a thing, and that comes from Shantae. You just start talking. You don't start with like, hey, we're going to write a speech, we're going to do a thing. No, you start with the small little activity. Hey, we're going to do this little creative writing, and then we're going to share. And then we're going to do this little speech, and then guess what? You just spoke. This is the public speaking. Because a lot of them come with the thought the public speaking is the stage, the camera, the lights, everybody's looking at you, everybody's going to judge you, everybody's going to listen to every little thing you do wrong. So you're changing that mindset into, it's every time you're not talking to yourself, it's the public speaking. That's how I usually start with them. Like, hey, you talk to a friend, that's public speaking. You're not talking to just one person, that's it. So next one is the topics, and that's where the cognitive learning theory comes to play. That is where you connecting your students to what they are doing, and that's where part of your multisensory level learning coming together too. So the students are feeling, they're not just learning with their minds, they're learning with their senses. And I am big on stories. I don't know if you can tell by now. So my structure and my speeches that my students do in their classrooms are storytelling. Just like Shantae was talking about their persuasive speech. And the structure I'm using, which is similar to the persuasive speech as well, they're making the point, they're telling the story, and then they're going for an impact or the moral of it. So which is similar, and they're doing it 3 times because there's 3 points. And when I teach a younger generations, I tell them it's a magic number, 3. I like throwing because of my creative nature. I can't help it. It's about magic, and I tell them that if they don't listen, I turn into a dragon. And sometimes it works. And they ask me what kind of a dragon, and I tell them, you don't want to find out. Because it's going to turn scary. So the cognitive learning theory tells us that if we connect our students to the topic, they're going to compartmentalize it in small little pieces of information, and they connect it to the information they already know. Storytelling, as you know, triggers all kind of senses, and that's why I find that that is the easiest way. We all have stories. We'll have stories from childhood, we'll have stories from the current days, we'll have stories from yesterday, from today, from tomorrow, and I find that it is easier way to have them talking. And if they can't think of stories that they have of themselves, they can tell stories about their kids, they can tell stories about their coworkers, anything else, or if nothing else, they can talk fables. We all know fables. Yeah. We all have stories from what our grandmas read to us. But what I do in the beginning, and that's what I put there, before we even on the first class, I tell them, hey, make a list of all the things you like. Make a list of things you like to talk about. Make a list of books you read. And then I have them read those lists. And I tell them, if you hear somebody else reading off their list and you like something on their list, add it to your list. That way, when we go through the semester and I tell them, hey, you need to write a speech, I tell them, go back to that list you made in the very first day, take something off that list and write a speech about that thing off your list. So that way we have a list in the beginning of the semester, and we work with that list through the whole semester, so we never wonder what we're going to write a speech about, because we made a list in the very first, before we knew we're going to write speeches. So that's the key. You made that list before you knew you're going to write speeches, because once you know you have to write speeches, your mind goes blank. Because that's when you don't know what you're going to write about. But if you do it in the beginning, before you, first things like, hey, what are the things you like? Make a list, and I make it a competition. I go for who has the longest list. Then it turns into like 3 pages, 4 pages, and everybody's like, mine is longest. Like, great. You're going to have fun the whole semester. You're going to be the one with the longest, the most speeches through the whole semester. All right. And the last piece, a delivery. And that's where some of the cultural nuances do come in. Most of you may or may not have noticed, if you have some friends from different cultures, smiles, facial expressions, gestures are different in every culture. Some Ukrainians, some Russians don't smile. So if you have that part on the delivery that you have to grade and you don't know that they don't smile, you would mark it down because you didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, didn't do gestures, didn't hop all over the stage, didn't do all the things. But it's just not the thing that they do. So before you mark it down, talk to them. Ask questions. A lot of times people come or others come and it's like, hey, what do I do? I don't know what to do. And the first thing I ask is, hey, did you ask them? And there's like, no. It's like, why not? Like, how do you know? If you don't ask, how do you know? Like, have a conversation. So before you start teaching and before you start jumping and go do this, ask them. So that we're going back to what both presenters said before. Before you have to get them to mimic you, see if they can develop their own style. Watch how they deliver their speeches, because it is possible that they just don't want to smile. Why do we want them to smile? If they don't want to smile, they don't want to smile. Maybe in their peers, nobody else smiles. I mean, they're going to look stupid if they're the only one smiling, right? We don't want that. We want them to have their own style in their own peers, and we want them to feel comfortable. That's the whole idea by the end of their speech. So they do feel comfortable. By the end of their course, we want them to feel comfortable presenting, and most likely, I want to create in my classes that positive association for them to feel like, I can do this. I can tell my story, because those who can tell the stories rule the world. That's how I run my classes, of having them comfortably tell their stories, because then they can land the interviews, they can land their jobs, they can talk to their friends, they can have relationships, they can talk to their kids, they can talk to their friends, and they can figure things out. And it's a practical implementation, and not just the speech that they will never deliver again. They understand why they're doing it, and that's where I stand. So we're going back to the learner-centered curriculum, not just the classroom. All the science, all the art. If you need all the scientific research with Belmore, we have all the references. Do I need to say it, or will just leave it? All right. So those of you who do need to know all the science behind it, I'll just did the art and the sound and dance here for you. But if you need all the science, here's the science behind it. And I'm turning it back to Shantae. I don't know how to work the technology. The clicker. I don't need the clicker. Yeah, you do the rest.
No, I don't need the clicker.